The midday sun bore down on a western town, its heat bleaching the wood and bone of the buildings, making the dusty road shimmer like a mirage. Dust kicked up beneath the wagon wheels, and horses snorted as townsfolk moved in and out of doorways, seeking brief respite from the sun's glare in the shadows. Beside the saloon, where a trash barrel leaned against the wall, a woman knelt with her children. She had tied her hair back with a piece of cloth, her face pale under the sun, her eyes flickering with each passer-by who might have noticed her. Her young son sat beside her on the ground, his bare feet dusty, clutching a tin can filled with bread crusts someone had discarded. His sister, a thin girl of 6, balanced a broken plate on her knees, licking beans from it as if it were a grand meal. The mother, Nyra, gently touched their shoulders, urging them to eat quickly, to hide the hunger that had driven them to this point. Shame clung to her like the dust on her clothes. Whispers followed her down the street. There she is again, the widow, scavenging for scraps. Her husband's gone, leaving her with children to feed. She won't last long like this. People like her drift away like tumbleweed. Nyra heard the whispers, though she kept her eyes downcast, her pride burning hotter than the sun. Her children's ribs pressed against their thin clothes, their cheeks hollow. She would have endured hunger herself, but not her children, not her babies, yet it tore at her to be seen scavenging, where drunks tossed their leftovers. A shadow fell over her, and she looked up to see a man standing there, his frame broad, his face weathered by the sun and wind. His hat cast a shadow over his gray-green eyes, which missed nothing. He held a sack of supplies in one hand, and the sight of the widow crouched by scraps made his jaw tighten, as if he were swallowing back words. "Nyra," he said. The rancher had never been one for town gossip, but he had heard enough to know her name, to know her struggles since her husband had been buried a year past. He watched the boy chew slowly on a crust of bread. He watched the girl wipe beans from the plate with her finger and suck them clean. His eyes softened, then hardened like iron resisting its own will. "Gather your things," he said, his voice low, steady, and final. "You're coming home with me." The words hung in the air more sharply than if he had fired a gun. Nyra blinked at him, stunned, clutching her children close. "What?" she managed to say, her voice a mix of defiance and disbelief. "You heard me," he replied, his eyes holding hers unwavering. "Gather what's yours. You and the children. You're coming with me." Her heart pounded in her chest. The children looked up at him, wide-eyed, not understanding, but sensing the gravity in his tone. "We don't need charity," she whispered, forcing her spine straight, though shame made her throat ache. "It ain't charity," he said, shifting the sack to his other hand, his gaze steady as a deeply rooted post. "A man doesn't stand by while good people starve. You'll come with me today." Nyra began to object, but her son tugged at her skirt, murmuring, "Mema, I'm still hungry." Her daughter leaned against her, gazing at Caelum as if he were a beacon of stability. Nyra's resolve wavered. Pride clashed with desperation, but desperation prevailed. She gave a swift, reluctant nod. The rancher neither smiled nor gloated. He simply gestured toward the outskirts of town, where his wagon awaited. "All right, let's go then." They boarded the wagon, the children clinging to each other. Nyra sat rigidly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Caelum drove with hands rough and weathered, his silence profound but not unkind. Dust clouded behind them as the town receded, the whispers fading with distance. On the open road, grass swayed in the hot wind. Nyra's son leaned against her, drifting off to sleep, while her daughter sat close, stealing shy glances at Caelum. He reached into the sack, pulled out a loaf of fresh bread, and silently offered it. The girl hesitated until Nyra gave a slight nod. She tore off a piece gently, gave half to her brother, and nibbled the rest, her eyes shining with the taste of real food. Nyra's voice, firm but tinged with steel, cut through the silence. "We don't need your charity." Caelum kept his eyes on the road. "It ain't charity," he replied. "It's a place to catch your breath." Her breath hitched. She turned away, looking at the vast landscape, the horizon where the sky met the earth. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to envision a future beyond hunger. The ranch appeared before them. By late afternoon, a house stood sturdy and weathered, fields stretched wide, fences neat, and cattle grazing like dark shadows against the golden landscape. The creek flowed steadily, like a gentle breath. The children's eyes widened at the sight, finding it more than enough of a palace. Inside, the kitchen smelled of wood and dust, empty yet inviting. That evening, Nyra cooked, her nervous hands preparing beans and cornbread. She placed the food on the rough wooden table. Caelum sat across from her, his broad shoulders relaxed, his eyes unreadable as they glanced at her. They ate in silence, broken only by the children's chatter, the girl humming softly, the boy swinging his legs against the bench. The air was thick with tension, but beneath it lay a steadier current, an unspoken agreement between necessity and pride. Days turned into a steady rhythm. Nyra managed the house, cooked, and mended. Caelum rose before dawn, worked the fields, and repaired fences. The children, once timid, began to explore. The girl braided the mane of a horse, while the boy laughed as chickens scattered around his feet. One evening, Caelum returned with a neighbor woman in tow, her eyes sharp, lips thin, and voice carrying too loudly. She looked at Nyra, then at Caelum, a faint smile on her lips. "People are talking, you know. A widow under your roof. It doesn't look right." Caelum's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He merely showed her to the door, closed it firmly, and returned to the table. Nyra's cheeks burned with shame, the neighbor's words stinging deeper than intended. That evening, she packed her belongings, prepared to leave. However, as she observed her children slumbering contentedly, their bellies full, faces relaxed in dreams, she hesitated. She couldn't uproot them from this delicate haven. In the subsequent days, subtle gestures spoke volumes. Caelum repaired a torn edge of her gown, working quietly and meticulously, then left it neatly folded on her chair. Nyra mended his frayed shirt, her hands steady as she stitched each seam. Fresh flowers from the meadow bloomed in a jar on the table. Her resolve began to waver, but old wounds of sorrow and guilt made it difficult to let go. At the local mercantile, whispers cut like blades. "She's claimed his table, but not his name," a man jeered. Caelum usually dismissed such remarks, but one insult rang louder than the rest. "No respectable man keeps a woman like that," the man sneered. Caelum turned, his fists clenched, but he refrained from striking. His composure and restraint held more power than any blow. Nyra, witnessing this, felt a surge of guilt. Believing her presence was tarnishing him. That night, she sat on the porch, her bundle ready. Caelum discovered her there. "Don't flee from a place that's already yours," he murmured, his voice gruff with sincerity. She gazed at him, tears welling, but words escaped her. Then the tempest arrived. Rain pounded the ranch. Thunder shook the windows. The children awoke, crying. Nyra cradled them, soothing their fears, while Caelum lit the lamps, his hands steady. Later, when the children were asleep, she admitted in a hushed tone, "I'm just a burden." Caelum's voice was hoarse with emotion. You're not a burden. You're the part of me I never knew was missing. Their hands nearly brushed, the air between them charged, but she recoiled, frightened of her own yearning. The storm subsided, revealing a dawn bathed in gold, the meadow glistening. Caelum stood in the grass, hat in hand, a simple silver ring gleaming in his rough palm. He knelt, not with elaborate words, but with simple, steadfast ones. I haven't got much to offer, just a home, a heart, and a place by my side. If you'll have it. Nyra's eyes filled with tears, her voice quivering as she whispered, Yes, yes, I will. The children nestled between them, sunlight reflecting off their tears, dust rising like golden mist. Caelum placed the ring on her finger, his expression open, vulnerable, a man transformed. And so, the ranch, once quiet, became more than just a refuge. It became a home. If this story touched you, give it a like and tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in their shoes? Subscribe to Frontier Stories and join us as we continue to tell stories of hope, resilience, and the beautiful, messy truth of Wild West.